Please welcome the Nobel laureate in economics, Milton Friedman, right there.
Tell us how we're going to get automobile dealers who really care about servicing the car as much as they care about selling us the car. Tell us how we're going to get automobile dealers who sell us safety with the same vigor that they sell us cosmetics.
Well, if the public at large really wanted to buy safety rather than cosmetics, it would be in the self-interest of the automobile dealers to sell them safety. You have had some automobile companies that have concentrated on selling safety, and they have not done very well in the sales. You can't blame. Here you have, let me give you a very simple example. You have the so-called Superba car, which is built by the Checker company that produces Checker cabs. They emphasize safety. It's the safest car probably there is built in America. They haven't been able to sell very many. If the problem with your talk is that you're not talking in terms of what the consumer really wants as judged by what he's willing to pay for. You're talking in terms of what you think he ought to want.
I am also talking, okay, so the underpinning here, underneath your statement here is the stupid public want landau tops and colors, and they put blue lights on these cars in the showrooms, and everybody says, yeah, I want one of those, like Pavlov's dog.
I'm not going to call them stupid. The public is entitled to buy what it wants to buy. Who am I to say whether those tastes are better or worse than my taste?
What's your conclusion on a person who's more interested in the style of a car than whether or not the baby's protected after the collision? Well, that's stupid.
I think he has every right to pursue his own objectives and his own tastes, and I have every right to try to persuade him he's wrong.
Okay.
But if I can't persuade him, do I have the right to force him? Now, you don't bring in the baby, because that raises another and an extraneous and very difficult issue. Because I will agree with you, he does not have the right
to put a baby like an egg in a crate and
That's right. That's a different question. A third-party effect is different.
I trust you wouldn't pass a law to oblige babies to be constrained in cars.
No, I probably would not. But I think that
You're not very comfortable in saying no to the question.
No, I'm comfortable. But what I would do is I would say that any parent parent ought to be subject to suit and to being sent to jail if a child has been damaged because of that parent's
Right. Are you willing to pay for the prosecutor that it's going to take to develop the evidence that the mother didn't place the baby properly in the car, and the bureaucracy that will accompany the enforcement of the law which says that you can go to jail if you don't?
Unfortunately, I have to pay for it. I'm not, as I say,
so there are limits to your free
society. I'm not an anarchist.
Okay.
I believe that government has a very important role, but it's a limited role.
Okay.
And because we've been trying to extend the role, we haven't been doing what government ought to do as well as it does, as it should. We've been doing a terrible job on what ought to be the first function of government. The first function of government is to protect the nation against foreign enemies and to protect individual citizens against assault by their fellow citizens. And we've been doing a terrible job on both ends.
And in that goal, you are aligned with John Stuart Mill.
Absolutely.
Not bad company, and I want to show you what I've taken out of your book. You've quoted Mill in
Good.
here.
I'm glad to see you've read to page 3.
I've tried my... two. Page 2, Doc. All right, let's... he's tough. This is a long hour, I'll tell you. Okay, here it is, John Stuart. The sole end for which mankind are warranted. This looks grammatically incorrect, but stay with us. Individually or collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number is self-protection. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. And then, the only part of the conduct of anyone, his own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. In other words, let's understand that. For my own good, the government cannot pass what would be called forcible action. In other words, here's the way a person ought to be able to kill themselves.
The right to commit suicide is a natural human right.
It's your life.
It's your life. Now,
and you don't want the government to spend any money to prevent you from doing that.
Absolutely no. Now, obviously, I, as a friend of yours, will try to prevent you. If you were a friend of mine and you suddenly got to a bridge and were going to jump over, I would certainly rush over and grab you and pull you up.
But you don't want public money to keep me from doing it.
Well, I would go farther. No, I want to go farther on a personal basis. I would reason with you. I would argue with you. But let's suppose after I had reasoned with you, after I had argued with you, I had failed to persuade you. Do I have the right to use force to prevent you from disposing of your own life? The clearest case of that, I certainly do not. I certainly do not. And you do not. And certainly, you do not have the right to put your hands in the pockets of other people in order to prevent somebody from doing something in his own value system.
I assume, then, that if somebody wants to smoke marijuana, that's their business,
That's
too?
his business, absolutely.
Are we going to take that to heroin and addiction?
Absolutely. Now, let me go back on that one, because that's a very interesting thing. Even if on ethical principles, you believe it is right to prevent somebody else from smoking heroin, as a matter of expediency, it's a terrible mistake. The largest...
So is jumping off the bridge.
No, I don't mean that. I mean it's a terrible mistake for society to render heroin illegal, because that increases the harm which heroin does. Why do we have so much crime in the inner cities and in the cities? Over 50% of it is attributed to crime for the sake of acquiring money to buy heroin. Why is heroin so expensive? Because it's illegal. We went through this with prohibition. Whether you believe it's right or wrong to prevent people from drinking alcohol, we had the experience with prohibition in which we found that it did more harm than good.
And a lot of guys got shot in the garage.
A lot of guys got shot, and more important, the basic respect for law was eroded. Law-abiding people who would never ordinarily have broken the law broke the law in order to get a drink.
Because they knew that the law enforcement agencies could not possibly enforce with any efficiency the laws against the prohibition law.
But the reason they couldn't enforce it was because it wasn't publicly backed. If the 90% of the public had been in favor of the prohibition law, you could have enforced it.
But I'm promising you 90% of the public right now is in favor of enforcing prohibition against heroin.
And you cannot enforce it. I agree. I was understating my case. Even with 90% of the people, you can't enforce it. And it does vastly more harm today because it is illegal than it would do if it were legal. Let me point out for a moment that more lives are lost each year through drinking alcohol than through heroin.
But
if there's a case, if you're going to make the case for preventing heroin on the basis of saving lives, there's a much stronger case for prohibition of alcohol.
But there would be some who would argue that to relax law enforcement or to take away law enforcement pressure on heroin trade is to ensure that heroin deaths will meet and exceed alcohol deaths.
On the contrary, it would reduce the number of heroin deaths. Why would it reduce the number of heroin deaths? In the first place, many of the deaths come from impure or adulterated heroin or needles that are contaminated. In the second place, as we found in Prohibition, the fact of Prohibition encouraged alcoholism rather than the opposite. To the young people in particular, it became an adventure to go out and get drunk, to go to a speakeasy. Today, with heroin illegal, it pays a heroin pusher to create an addict. Because, given that it's illegal, it's worth his while to spend some money on getting somebody else hooked. Because once hooked, he has a captive audience.
I assume, like the baby in the car, you would support legislation prohibiting the sale of heroin and other addictive substances to juveniles.
Well, that's a very hard question. I think there is a different case for juveniles. But whether you could really handle the question, that's a question of expediency, not a principle. If I thought I could enforce it, I would be willing to say that for juveniles. But I'm not sure I could enforce it, and I'm not sure when I looked into it I wouldn't decide I did more harm than good even there.